Great rewards don't wait, so why should you? Through the Invigor Book and Buy Grower program, you could earn a $30 per bag rebate when you book all of your Invigor hybrid canola by November 14th. Talk to your retailer. Terms and conditions apply.
Well, here at Real Agriculture, we like to talk to authors in our RealAg Bookclub. And here today, we're talking to an author that has a new book out called The Culture of Control. And we're talking to Ken Motiuk. How are we doing today, Ken?
I'm doing well, Shaun. Doing well. Thank you for having me.
Okay, interesting title, Culture of Control. What are you alluding to there?
I'm essentially alluding to the way the Canadian Wheat Board evolved over time into essentially being a bureaucratic institution that controlled the entire Western Canadian grain industry, the marketing, handling, and transportation. And it was founded for various good reasons. I mean, supply or essentially securing the supply of wheat for Great Britain during both world wars, the hard times of the Depression. And at that time, I mean, I was a different kind of farmer in those years. But what happened is over time, the Wheat Board evolved into a very powerful and controlling institution, which led to a degree of dysfunctionality in the system by the mid 70s. So the book tells the whole story.
Do you are you in your research? Are you surprised, or what was your reaction to the fact it was in place for so long?
Well, it's an interesting it's an interesting story because I likened it to peeling off the layers of an onion versus a silver bullet when you're looking for some solution to a problem. And this all happened in the 70s when came back and started farming. And this was right after the great Soviet grain robbery in the early 70s, where grain prices tripled in 16 months between 1972 and 73. And in the late 60s, Canada was not selling grain at all. The Wheat Board was holding back sales, thinking they could influence the price of grain upward. But it took the Soviet great grain robbery to all of a sudden spike the markets. And so the price of grain took off, and all of a sudden, Canada could not get their grain to market. And their system, the handling transportation systems, were not working.
You in this title of Culture of Control, that alludes to there's something Canadian about this in terms of is there a statement about us as a country in terms of we're okay with these institutions that have control, or hey, the government knows best, or what? It just feels like there's more depth there than just this about the Canadian Wheat Board.
I'm not sure we are that different than anybody else. But I think if you look at today's era of pushback and even the current government saying, well, we've got to control the growth of the bureaucracy. And we talk about the housing industry saying the cost of houses has gone up because of regulation and all the regulations we have with emission controls and everything. This is just simply government encroachment into the lives of people. Bureaucracies just grow and new ones are set up and old ones are not pushed out the back door. And this is a story of that too. And this is really a success story because Western farmers, before this was all in vogue as it is now, Western farmers banded together and took back their control of running their businesses and marketing their grain. And we got the dig regulation we needed to get the system moving.
Yeah, like how much of this culture is truly about like protecting standards and quality, and maybe trying ultimately in the case of the wheat board trying to get this higher price versus preserving kind of the status quo for those that are in a power position.
I think both of those are intertwined into this. And nobody likes to see change. And again, when this all started, the wheat board perhaps had purposes to serve, and one was to secure supplies of wheat for Great Britain in World War One, and that was the first mention of a Canadian Wheat Board, which was later disbanded. And at the time, look at the farming community. I mean, right now we wake up in the morning and our phones beeping with what the grain prices are, everything. Our grain prices are, what happened in the world, what the USDA corn report is. Well, in the 1920s, you woke up at 4:30 in the morning, you fed the horses, you went and had breakfast, you hooked up the wagon box or the sleigh in winter, and you took a 4-hour ride to town. You took in a load of wheat to the elevator, and the manager says, "Oops, I'm sorry. I know it was a one last load you brought, but our bins for number one are full, so you're going to have to take a number two or take the load home."
Yeah.
That was the era where the wheat board got control, one by one. But the world changed.
Yeah, yeah. Right now, we're hearing from the Canadian government and others, other countries as well. Red tape reduction, trying to remove regulation. Unleash the potential of industry. Based on your research for the book, are there things for the government or Canadians to be aware of that sometimes that's not as simple as we might be led to believe?
Well, the point is, do you want to make it happen or not? And it's got to be, politicians will never drive this. Citizens will, people will backlash on all of these restrictions that are happening everywhere in our lives. And that's what happened here. When I say to today's politicians, I say, buy a copy of my book and read it, because there's a success story where participants, farmers, were able to wrestle back the control of their system from a government bureaucracy.
What other industries does this like? Obviously, the wheat board's a good example here that you use in the book and on the cover. Are other industries in Canada, in your opinion, impacted by similar sorts of control?
Well, it's just simply regulatory control in a sense. It's
Yeah.
control because these regulations have been imposed by governments that are so long. We've been on this kick to that Canada's going to save the world, and we're going to have lead in emission control, and we're going to put all these rules on development and say, well, all of a sudden we're realizing, I know we have a good friend that's a small developer in Edmonton. They build houses, and he tells us about the cost, regulatory cost of building a house. So, and then people are wondering why we don't have enough homes. It's basically bureaucratic encroachment, politicians and promises. You create these big bureaucracies that are not market driven. And eventually they evolve into institutions where it's job preservation and power for the individuals.
Yeah, I have a good friend that's also a home builder, and he shares the same sort of sentiment that, the way that, and it's not just the case of current regulations, those regulations for home builders are increasing.
Correct.
And he's often said that, in 5 years, I want to be out of this business because I don't want to go through this headache anymore.
Yeah. Well, how can you move ahead in an economy when you're just stuck, bound in all it takes, months and years to get approvals. I mean, look at the pipeline proposals, any large. Now all of a sudden Carney's trying to reverse all that. Well, good luck. It's going to take a lot of will to fight the bureaucracy and everything and turn that back.
So, a lot of times politicians will defend protectionist systems in the name of whether, protecting family farms, for example, or it could be just Canadians in general. How do you think, how should reformers reframe this kind of narrative to win over the public and some policymakers?
Cost. Cost to the pocketbook. We have to start, like, even people talk about high grocery costs. Well, part of high grocery costs are trucking vegetables from California. You're going to put all kinds of taxes on carbon emissions and on fuel. Well, where's that going to go? That's just passed on to the consumer. So you wonder why your groceries are so high. And the politicians in Ottawa kind of look with amazement. Well, we wonder why. Oh, it must be the grocers who are gouging everybody. Well, no, you look at all the controls you have in place. Some of the labor controls. Sure, some of these are needed. We don't have kids working in coal mines anymore, but that's overshot. We got so many regulations here and it's cost. It all adds to the cost. Housing, groceries, driving on a vacation.
There's lots of learnings for all of us, I think, in this book by the sounds of it. What was a learning for you in your research?
Well, because of my background, I kind of lived this. So the research happened all my life because as I started working, my first job, or the first time I got involved, I came out of university in 1976. I had an agriculture degree. I started working for Alberta Agriculture. I also lived in Don Mazinkowski's riding. So my first exposure was trying to farm and not being able to sell grain. And in the time, there was quite a change. There was more use of herbicides on the farms. Canola acreage was rising. Fertilizer use was increasing. And the problem is you couldn't sell your grain. You're stuck with the wheat board quota system, which would be 3 bushels a quota, 3 bushels an acre for every farmer across Western Canada, whether you got 20 bushels in Foremost or 45 in Mundare. And so I started going deeper and deeper. And in 1979-80, I went to Ottawa and I worked for Don Mazinkowski as a special assistant. And I really got to know the system. And I just got more and more upset and more driven that this is not right. So my research really occurred over about a 35-year period. I just sort of filled it all in here over the last 4 years.
Do you think in like at 100,000 feet, a lot of in this topic, it's worse than people think? Like that's the perception I kind of get as I'm listening to you, that everyone's like, the regulation here and the regulation there, and this is going on, and yeah, it's bothering me, or I heard about it, maybe it's not even impacting me personally, but in general, Canadians don't have a sense about how burdensome some of this actually is.
Correct, because it's hidden. It's hidden again until it starts to hurt their pocketbooks. They're not going to pay attention because they say that doesn't bother me. So it's this level of awareness amongst consumers and amongst voters. And and in the wheat board, there was so much of this. There was, again, many of the reasons the wheat board started were good, but it eventually sort of lost its focus and the environment changed. And the wheat board had to change, and they refused to change. And it was farmers that drove this. I mean, I'm nobody special. I'm just a farmer. There were many other farmers. I just had some unique opportunities. I was on the board of directors of United Grain Growers. I was on the board of directors of the Wheat Board when Harper wound it down. I worked in advisory bodies in Alberta agriculture. I was with the wheat growers. And really, this movement to change the marketing system started with the Palliser wheat growers in the early 1970s in southern Saskatchewan. And I got to know some very good friends I have were part of that organization, which later became the Western Wheat Growers. And this was the group that was most driven to tell the world and tell other farmers why we had to change.
Ken, you haven't mentioned supply management yet. And I'm assuming that is something that topic is something that you're passionate about.
Well, it falls in the similar category. I mean, I guess the people in it are fairly privileged because they were granted a quota for nothing, and now it's worth millions and millions and millions of dollars. And if you're part of it now, you don't really want to see it change. But the question has to be, really, is this what's best for Canadian consumers? This whole business of price. Why are milk and eggs and poultry more expensive in Canada than the US? Is this really serving Canadians well, or just a small group of entitled producers? I'm not a dairy farmer. I'm not a poultry farmer, but there are similarities here. No, I'm not a fan of regulation, and I don't think supply management serves the consumer of Canada or the marketplace or the economy in the best manner. But that's a tough one to enroll.
Oh, I think so. I I think that's probably understated. Getting rid of ending the single desk with the wheat board is a different process or is a different path of resistance than if Canada decided to unwind supply management for a number of reasons.
Yeah. Well, there's a large, I think I must sort of clarify, there was a huge difference between Canadian Wheat Board management and the current supply management, because under current supply management, you have a quota that has a value and you have a guaranteed price. With the wheat board, our quotas had no value, and we had no guaranteed price, and we had no options. So there was no value that we could show, and to what the wheat board and numerous studies were all inconclusive. Was there a benefit or not?
Yeah. And if you can't prove a benefit and the benefit is kind of qualitative, really hard to justify the keeping him. That's kind of what happened with the single desk with the cane wheat board in the
Correct.
end. Yeah. We've been talking to Ken Motiuk. He is the author of Culture of Control. The book really does urge citizens, entrepreneurs, and policymakers to dismantle protectionist frameworks, demand transparency, and embrace open market principles that empower consumers rather than institutions. Ken, thanks so much for joining us. Hey, where do we find the book if we're interested?
Okay, the book it's available on Amazon, amazon.ca, or it's in the US and amazon.com. I do have a website. It's called cultureofcontrol.ca.
Okay.
So you can look there and it'll tell you where the books are. It can be ordered from many places, bookstores, or you can get a hold of me through my website and I can mail you one and I'll sign it.
Oh,
I'm selling them for $30.
there you
And
go.
but unfortunately postage is 20. But that's pretty much the price you'll pay on Amazon. So you can send me a message through my website. I can send you a book, or you just go to Amazon.
Great stuff. Well, Ken, thanks so much. Congratulations on the book. Best of luck to you with the sales, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much, Sean. Bye-bye now.
For the latest ag news, agronomic advice, and more, check out realagriculture.com